Marketer of the Day, Episode 710, Website Redesign and Rebranding. Build trust using Hero's Journey Self-Transformation and change the world with Yoko Co. Yep. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. And I have a quick question for you. Does your website really matter? Does it get across the message that you want to get across? Does it adhere to all those somewhat boring but important legalese and compliance issues? And most importantly, does your website and your business have a purpose? Are you serving some kind of a greater good? Well, whether you have or you haven't thought about any of those things, we have an expert here with us on the show. That is Yoko from YOKOCO.com. That's YokoCo.com. And we're going to hear all about the things that you can and should and hopefully will soon be doing to your website. So, Chris, glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. And so, I mean, what has kind of been your focus, your passion in these last 12 months or so? And I mean, what sorts of things do you think we need to know these days?
So the big one, as it pertains to the intro you just shared, is being able to take this thing that I think a lot of organizations take for granted. We got to make sure we have a website and get it up there, and then they kind of move on to the next thing. But your web presence is the single biggest lever you have in terms of being able to communicate with the world. And when you use it correctly, you can really affect major change. And so being able to help organizations understand how to go through that process, and we've really been leaning into, we started using it in 2014, but continuing to lean into Joseph Campbell's kind of the hero's journey as a roadmap for how organizations use their website and their web presence correctly to really affect the world as a whole and build a better world.
So when you say Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, I've heard about this, how it's like the Star Wars template, right? Of how there's like the underdog, and there's the inciting incident, and there's like an initial failure, and then another failure, and the big succession kind of thing. But how this pertains to these businesses and these websites, what does this hero's journey mean exactly?
Yeah, so it's I'm glad you knew what it was, because we run into a lot of people that have no idea what it is. Some people that have a vague recollection from junior high literary classes, but it's exactly what you mentioned. It's kind of that same template. Every hero goes through these 12 steps. And the way that it starts, and the way that we saw this correlation with the organizations we work with, is a lot of times you're going through a rebranding or a website redesign process. You're changing who you are and how you project and identify yourself to the world. We partnered with a research group back in 2015, I think it was, and saw that more people trust what you say on your website whenever a person has made a referral to you than any other platform, including third-party review sites, which was a bit of an eye-opener for us. So when you go through this process of self-transformation first, which is what the hero's journey showcases, you kind of jump into the realm of the unknown. You try to solve a problem that you're not sure how to solve. You come through it first, you change yourself. And by changing the way you project who you are to the world, people, done right, obviously, people start to change the way that they behave towards you. They realize, these people are leaders in this space, or, they can help us do X, Y, and Z, or they're affecting this level of change. That begins to be an active change that you see within your community. And depending on the type of organization you are, when you follow that through all the way to its kind of natural course of completion, by making these changes in your community, you're then having a deeper ripple effect across the world as a whole. And so you get a chance to kind of go through this entire process and understand that it starts with self-transformation, but ultimately ends with a major change and impact in the way that you kind of work your difference in the world.
And to kind of help us understand your magic, your secret sauce, can you kind of tell us like maybe what a website or a business you've dealt with what looked like or did or said before you came across and applied some of this, and then what sort of things you changed and what was the end result? Yeah,
absolutely. So the biggest one we see, especially for small to mid-sized businesses, is people say, you know what, it's there, it's a brochure, we just need to have it there, and we want to update it so we don't look out of date, right? And so we'll make some updates, but we'll go through a process where we're really kind of understanding how the website should be supporting the organization itself, be it a business, a nonprofit, an association, whatever the case might be. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback we see afterwards is usually within like 30 to 90 days, this CEO, COO, whatever will end up being like, you know what? We get a lot more word of mouth referrals now than we used to. That was an interesting, side effect of us redesigning the website. And The good news we had to share with them there is like, hey, you've always been getting good word of mouth referrals. The bad news is whenever you had the old site, people are looking at the site before they decided to call you, and then they just decided not to call you. So one of the real easy things you can do with an organization is kind of help increase the effect that you have with the customers, clients, patients, members you serve already. Because chances are, if you're doing a good job with them, they are talking to people that might be a good prospective fit with you more than you might be talking to other folks, and refer people in. And if then you don't have a good website or a website that's conducive with what that referral source ended up sharing, you're going to miss out because it doesn't jive with, oh, they said this was a really great like modern organization, and here they've got this website from 1998, and this must not be the right place, so I'm going to bow out. And that's one of the really easy things you can do to kind of really begin to affect results. And then obviously, as things kind of steamroll from there, you get to work with more and more people. You get to introduce maybe other members of your community, or depending on how you work, have deeper, more meaningful relationships with those people. And that, positive impact ripples outward.
Super cool. And I mean, you make a lot of interesting points here, especially that a few minutes ago we were talking about how people might see things on third-party review sites, but they trust what's on your website more because who knows if some random person said this or if that comment was from years ago. And so the other interesting point you make here is how like there might be a bottleneck on the website, right? Like how you said you had that client where they weren't getting word of mouth because people were being lost at the website, and as soon as the website was okay, then the water would flow through the pipe, so to speak. And it seems
Absolutely.
like, I'm sure you come across the kind of resistance where people say, well, where's my ROI? Where's my return on investment? And it's like, well, if you get all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, so to speak, then that ROI that you are missing out on will increase. But it's like hard to see it missing when it's not there, and it's hard to see the increase other than, well, I did a few more of these things that I should be doing right, and now I'm getting some results here. And so as far as like specific things that you're seeing these websites doing, like you said, that sometimes they look out of date, they haven't been updated in years. So what sorts of just, I don't know, like common things do you see again and again on these websites that people should be correcting these days?
So there's the really obvious ones where it, like you said, it looks out of date or it doesn't work on phones and stuff like that. But more often than not, the indicators that the website isn't doing what it needs to do is if it does feel like it's just an afterthought, if you're not getting a steady influx of whether it's leads or interested parties or partnerships or whatever, an influx of communication and traffic through your website. If you don't know how it actually supports the business, that's a big sign that it's not being used effectively, and you should be taking a look at something. If it used to be, we run into a lot of organizations where, hey, whenever we redid our website 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2 years ago, it was generating a lot of results. It was helping our sales team. We were getting, a lot of traffic, and now that seems to have dried up. That's often a sign, that something's going wrong. And of course, if it's just been, neglected or been shifted into hand after hand after hand, and it's always been an afterthought, there's a chance that there's a really good opportunity for that to be a breakthrough component of the business, because it is the thing that more people are going to see than just about any other aspect of your business. More people are going to see the website than become a customer, become a member, become a patient, or referral source, whatever the case might be.
And you made this kind of interesting point a few times here about how even though you might have redone the website a couple of years ago, things are always changing, right? Like the trend might go more into like the phones and the quick loading, but then next thing you know, like then phones get huge, or like tablets come out, and then it's all about the retina graphics, and so things change, and it's almost like as soon as you're happy with the website, then you need to refresh it. And that's been kind of a hard lesson for me to keep in mind that, like, every couple of years I have to go back and revisit and just look at, what's working and what's not working, and keep in mind like similar websites, or I kind of remember like that sort of swipe file, so to speak, and remember like what I didn't like about people's websites, or this person had a pop-up and I have to remember that, or this person had a quiz. So with all these things that could be done, how do you make sense of all that? Is it a matter of like you kind of have a feel for what the supposed template is for different industries, or is it about like what your client is looking for? Like, how do you just make sense of all the possibilities and do a handful of things that this website needs to do?
Yeah, so it is, like you said, it's an ongoing arms race, right? Like everyone's kind of constantly bettering their web presence, and while technology's become more fluid, that cycle of okay, we're going to redesign it and wait a few years and redesign it doesn't make as much sense anymore. Content management systems, just like apps, are being updated regularly on an ongoing basis, and you should really do the same with your web presence. But for a lot of organizations, it comes to what you mentioned, which is if they're not sure what they're getting out of it and they're not measuring things appropriately, then they don't really know what to do. So whenever it comes to the way that we work, usually if we are working with an organization that they haven't tracked any metrics, they don't really know what is working, what isn't working, you can follow some best practices to get things started. And one of those best practices is to start tracking that stuff. And so one of the things that we do for a lot of our clients is we call it a full funnel report. Basically, it starts at the top. What do our social and search impressions and views look like? How does that percolate into traffic into the website? Does that traffic engage with us? Does it convert at any level? If it does convert, what do those become marketing qualified leads? Or, depending on how a client classifies them, whatever they title them. How does that percolate and convert into sales qualified leads? How do they go through the sales process? And then ultimately what people have purchased, become members, engaged, partners, whatever the case might be. And then what was the return on investment of that? Once you know from top to bottom what those numbers look like, it becomes a lot easier to decide what it makes sense to do moving forward, right? Because now okay, we like our conversion numbers across the board, so we think we should drive more traffic. So let's make some of the changes. Let's create some new content that's going to drive some new traffic in. Let's do a couple of things around search engine optimization that are going to help us optimize and deliver more traffic to the top of that funnel, because we feel really good about the way it percolates through all the way to the bottom. And if we get another, 10,000 visitors a month, we know that's going to be another 100 customers, whatever the case might be. Or if you're not happy with the conversion rate at any given point, you begin to think about what you do there. Is it our content? Do we need to A/B test and maybe do some things that are going to make it more engaging, more likely to convert? Once people have converted, are they percolating through from marketing into sales qualified? How do we kind of massage that? So being able to kind of put some best practices in place first, follow that funnel and make sure you're benchmarking your numbers from the top to the bottom, and you can kind of see some correlation. A word of warning, a lot of people want to start benchmarking and then immediately get into attribution and be like, well, that wasn't a web lead. That came from this guy that I know. And then you start to fracture everything. If you're not tracking anything right now, just start tracking everything across the whole business. Usually people are going to touch your web presence unless you're in a really specific niche in terms of your industry. They're going to touch your website. They're going to talk to your salespeople or your team or whatever. It's going to be pretty fluid. So track everything across the board, perfect that model, and then you can start to modify and change things. But that's really kind of the basics. It's nothing too crazy.
Cool. And I'm kind of getting a feel for like the kind of science and the art blend, right? It's like you do the tracking and you get the data, and then based on that, you make some educated guesses, you make some judgments, and then you say, well, based on that, then maybe we'll do something like this with the blog post, or we'll change these things here. And so that way you aren't missing out on anything, right? You kind of have the heat map side of things, so to speak, or tracking the clicks, but then there's also the kind of the outside the box thing. So that way you're not just too much one or the other.
Absolutely. And that's always like the tricky bit, because people will read things online and be like, oh, well, this worked for this other organization, so why don't we just do exactly what they did? And you're a different brand, you have a different relationship, a different tone of voice. And so there is that blend of art and science, and how do you do the things that are right and consistent and congruent with who you are? Because a lot of times, again, if you just go through and copy, or you don't have something that's authentically you, by the time they get away from the web copy, which is something that they really liked because they raised their hand and said, we want to talk further, they talk to somebody who's now speaking a totally different language, and they begin to drop off. It's really got to be authentically you. And that's where a lot of the art comes. And then just the science is the measurement, and determine what steps make sense to take next.
And so we're talking a lot here about things like A/B testing, or making changes and seeing what the client thinks, and then changing back. So what's sort of the time frame on some of these things? Like, is it ongoing? Is it 6 months? Like, how long does it take to get some of these websites dialed in?
It really depends on the organization. I mean, we have some organizations we work with that they just want to kind of annually look at the numbers, make sure they're on the right path, put a couple of key strategic, deliverables in place throughout the year, and then just kind of run with it. And then we've got other clients where every 2 weeks we're driving enough traffic that it makes sense to kind of iterate and continuously be modifying things on an ongoing basis. So there's not a cadence that's right for every organization. If you're a, single or person or a partner or a small group of people, you don't have the time, nor is it going to be a worthy return on your time to be constantly tweaking everything. all the time. You kind of have to roll it in and make sure that you've also got enough traffic and data that it makes sense to react. So you have to give yourself time to get to that kind of statistical level of significance.
Well, great. And then, so as far as like some of these organizations you help, some of these websites that your agency has worked on, is there any that stands out like really, really brightly for you as far as like a website that you're like really proud of or that just came together really well?
Oh, there's a lot of those. In terms of alignment, so we work a lot with, we aim to work exclusively with organizations that have a passion or purpose beyond just profit. So we do work with a lot of commercial organizations, but they tend to be ones that are trying to build a better world. And we also do work with a lot of, nonprofits, healthcare associations. I think one of the ones in recent memory that is a favorite of mine is we did some work for the Andes Amazon Fund, which, in light of all of the news around the Amazon and it being, burnt and forested, was really excited to be able to help support those guys and being able to help defend and protect and conserve the Amazon. So that's one that I really like. And I mean, it's such a beautiful landscape, and we got a chance to kind of show some of that through the digital component and help them, raise some additional funds to help protect something like a couple 100 million additional hectares of Amazon rainforest. So that's huge.
Nice. And you always hear about like those kind of amazing things people are doing these days with like the drones that plant 1 million trees in one day and just like crazy stuff like that. And so, I mean, would you recommend that like any business out there, if they don't have one of these causes they're supporting and talking about on their website, should everyone maybe start thinking about going down this road?
I think so. I think that there's a big difference between the people that do it as like a marketing thing and the people that are really authentically concerned and aligned with whatever mission it is they're following through with. A big thing that we help a lot of organizations do is they kind of aspire to make some change, but they don't necessarily know what that should be. So for example, we do some work with an organization called the United Motor Coach Association. And it's the group that represents all the people that own motor coaches, buses that you might rent or reserve for, a party or a field trip or whatever the case might be. And off the top, it doesn't sound like there's anything really cause-oriented about that. But a well and efficiently used motor coach is going to be more effective than a car, even if you only have it 20% loaded. And they're doing a lot in terms of, being able to go with emission-free vehicles. And the more buses move to that, you not only get the advantage of moving a lot of people in a smaller vehicle and a smaller footprint, but maybe erasing the footprint altogether. So one of the things we did with them was agree to do work with them in exchange for them adding to their annual conference a speaker series on the environmental impact of the industry and how to minimize it, as well as add to their bylaws a goal to minimize their negative environmental impact and eventually get the industry to go carbon free. So there's a lot of opportunities, even if you feel like you're an organization that there's nothing that screams to you about, hey, here's how we can support or better the world. There's a lot of opportunities. But it makes sense to think about the stuff that really resonates with you and is something you'd authentically want to be behind. Because a lot of people do the buy one, give one, or the other, the Tom's clones and then like the Warby Parker clones and all that stuff. And I feel like it's got to go deeper than that.
Okay, yeah, and it's like it seems like as you kind of described that thought process there with the bus company, like sometimes it takes a while to think that through, right? It's like, okay, like
absolutely.
What are we like we're providing the service or we're doing this thing, and the negatives might be that to like the environment, and how do we offset that? And it might take a while to kind of figure out what that end result would be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it takes time. It's not, if some clients come in and they know like, here's what we do and here's how we can build a better world and we want you guys to help us do it. But a lot of them come to us like, hey, we've got some ideas and we know that the way we portray the causes that we represent, the alignment we have online is going to be a huge part of how people respond to and how we affect the world. But basically they want to be able to get to a place where they figure out what that is. And so in a lot of cases, we're working with clients to kind of help determine what that mission looks like and how they articulate it as a key component of their brand and a key component of kind of who they are and what their employees really care about.
And I imagine that, I mean, you've seen this done again and again, and it always helps to get that that person or the entity on the outside looking in, and some of these people might be kind of trapped in their own bubble and only be looking at what their industry is doing or what their competitors are doing. So I imagine that by having you and your agency take a look, they can kind of think outside the box, and they can like come up with all kinds of different solutions, not just in the charity or the cost thing we've been talking about, but also just in website redesigns, right? Like it always helps to have that fresh perspective.
Absolutely. It's, we always call it puzzle vision. So, you're working on a puzzle and you're just staring at a piece and somebody walks up from the couch or something. It's like, oh, there it is. And the fresh perspective goes a long way in helping an organization figure out at least what their options are, right? So, and that's, I think, part of the advantage of us working with a lot of different industries. We work with startups and technology platforms and SaaS organizations, and they tend to be on kind of the cutting edge of technology. And then we can borrow some of that information and apply it where appropriate to some of our clients that might be on the other end of the bell curve in terms of technology adoption, and help them kind of leapfrog and really make progress. So not only is it, like you said, the advantage of being able to take a look at things differently from a mission or a cause perspective, but just from a technology and marketing perspective in general, and how do you make sure everything's coming back to the result?
Yeah, and then the result of that would be that business that you're helping, they do something that's unique, and it's not really unique, it's just repurposed from some other industry, but no one in that industry is doing it. So in a way, it's unique and it's not unique, right?
Exactly. It's unique to them, yeah.
Yeah,
it's like a used car.
Right. There you go. Yeah. And made new again. So, if someone's listening to our conversation today and they say, these are some really great ideas. I like having options. I want to start a conversation with Chris and his team and see what they're all about, but I'm not sure if I'm a right fit, or I'm not sure what Chris and his team can do for me. Can you tell us what we need to know here as far as like, what's the website? Where do people go? How do they know if they're the right fit? And what are the actions to be taken here?
Yeah, for sure. So, if you're interested in chatting with us, we're at yokoco.com. So that's yokoco.com. If you're not immediately either attracted or repelled based on the language we use on the website, that'll probably give you a good idea if you're a fit. But we also have an assessment there for the types of organizations that we like to work with. And if you're interested in talking a little bit further, just use the contact form there, drop us a line. And, we'd be interested to talk to you and talk about what kind of change we can make together.
Super cool. So if you are ready to make that change or redo things with your business and your website, check out yokoco.com. That's yokoco.com. Go there, check out the language. Like Chris said, see if it attracts or repels you. Take that assessment, click the contact button, and we will see you there over at yokoco.com. And thanks, Chris, for taking the time and teaching us lots of cool things.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robert. Pleasure.
Subscribe to us right now while it's still fresh on your mind at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes.